Hello and welcome. My name is Melissa Galasso, and I'm excited to be here today to talk to you about our most recent FASB ASU. So this is the second ASU of 2021, issued in January of 2021. And this standard really goes back to a long-term project on revenue recognition, the gift that keeps on giving. So as we look at revenue recognition, that 5-step process, right? Each step requires that you do a little bit of analysis. In particular, this standard is looking at step 2, identifying performance obligations, but for a very specific group of entities, in particular, private company franchisors. So if we go back to 2020 and we look at the exposure draft to delay revenue recognition, we would have noticed that the delay was originally proposed to be only for private company franchisors. They did not include in the initial exposure draft a delay for all private companies. However, after some lobbying from private entities, in particular the AICPA's Technical Issues Committee, as well as other entities who said, you know what, it's not just franchisors. All of us really need some extra time due to COVID. Then the FASB extended it for all private entities. But the initial people who were proposed, or initial group of people who were proposed to receive the benefit, were private company franchisors. And the reason behind that is that these franchisors had a technical question in front of the FASB. They were having significant difficulties identifying performance obligations in franchises. And so when you think about this, when you are a franchisor, right, you are allowing some franchisee to operate, let's just use an example of a restaurant. And when we do this, typically when you're a franchisee of a restaurant, you pay an initial upfront fee to become a Chick-fil-A or to become a McDonald's. And then you pay a monthly fee, typically a percentage of revenue as part of the operations. Now, the question that was identified was this concept of a license, right? So typically you have a license and it's for a period of time to operate under that franchise. And the question was, how do I take this large upfront fee and how do I recognize it? Is it a separate performance obligation from the license? Is it really just part of the license that's recognized over time? Do I defer it and recognize the entire upfront fee over time? Do I recognize it all up front when they're finally set up as a franchise? Right, lots of questions were being posed. And so FASB decided to address that in separate standard setting. So ASU 2020-102 really is a set of one practical expedient and then another private company accounting policy election. And so this is updating Subtopic 952-606, which is for franchisors and revenue recognition. And so the theory behind this is really that cost and complexity of determining what meets that definition of a performance obligation in step 2, right? So thinking about that initial franchise fee. And sometimes maybe this is the first time you're a franchisor. You've operated an amazing restaurant and someone comes and says, hey, I'd love your concept. I'd like to franchise this in our city. And you have no basis from which to work from. Or you're a relatively new startup type of franchise and you don't really have enough information. And so that's really what they were dealing with here, is that cost and complexity, as well as level of effort. What's the benefit, right? So at the end of the day, we understand cost and complexity, but we also have to do a cost benefit analysis. And so was there a way to simplify this and still get users the information that they needed? And so again, this is that initial fee that private company franchisors receive upfront to become part of the franchise. And they do a lot of things as part of that upfront fee, right? It's not just pay me upfront, but we have to help you with site location. We have to set you up with bookkeeping. We have to get you hooked up with our suppliers. And so as a result, there's a lot of questions about were those distinct performance obligations? Was that one performance obligation? When do we recognize that? How we go through this? So again, very targeted in terms of the impact here. It is for non-public business entities. So if you're a public business entity and you're a franchise, you are assumed to have the ability to go through this process. So this is not for you. This is for those entities who are private entities, and they have to be in the scope of Topic 952, and that's any franchisor who is the party who grants business rights, the franchise, to the party, the franchisee, who will operate the franchised business. So as I mentioned, it's going to give two different elements here. The first one is a new practical expedient, and then the second one is an accounting policy election, both looking to simplify Topic 606. And for those of you who've implemented Topic 606, you know there's a lot of judgment and there's a lot of discussion, and then there's ultimately decisions that are made that end up in the note disclosures. So let's take a look first at the practical expedient. So this allows franchisors to account for pre-opening services as a separate performance obligation. They don't have to make an evaluation. They don't have to go through and determine whether it's distinct or a series of distinct goods or services. They can just assume that pre-opening services are a separate performance obligation from the franchise license. However, if the services are consistent with the predefined list. So let's take a look at that predefined list. So again, you can account for the following pre-opening services as distinct from the franchise license. So first, assistance in selecting the site. Very often, especially if you're a new franchisee, you're going to want to open it in a particular town, but where is a good answer? And so a lot of times that can be something the franchisor can help with. Assistance obtaining facilities and preparing the facilities for their intended use, including financing, architectural engineering, and lease negotiation, right? So this is typically trying to just get them, into a facility and going through that, the basic operation side. Training the franchisee's personnel or even the franchisee, right? So if you've ever seen the movie about McDonald's, it was super interesting to me from an accounting perspective on the whole franchise and looking actually at the land business. And so it's really interesting, very often picking the right land, picking the right location, and then training, right? Everything has to operate the same way. It doesn't matter which McDonald's you go to or which Chick-fil-A, you should have the exact same experience, right? That's what makes it a franchise. You also would be able to include pre-opening services related to preparation and distribution of manuals and similar material concerning operations, administration, and record keeping. So again, that continuity, that consistency, especially since there's typically an ongoing fee to be part of that franchise, they would want them to obviously maintain their books and records consistently. Then bookkeeping, information technology, and advisory services, including setting up their records, advising them about income, real estate, and other taxes, as well as local regulations. And then inspection, testing, and other quality control programs, again, to keep that consistency. So if these are the types of pre-opening services that you're providing, then those are going to be a separate, distinct performance obligation, separate from the license. Now, the question is, are they one performance obligations or are they several performance obligations? That's where the accounting policy election comes in. So a franchisor that elects that first practical expedient would then apply the guidance in Topic 606 to determine whether pre-opening services are distinct from one another, unless it makes a separate accounting policy election to account for the pre-opening services as a single performance obligation. So now we know it's distinct from the license, but now are they distinct from one another? You can go through and do that. You can make that analysis, or you can just choose to treat it as a single performance obligation. So those are the two big pieces of the puzzle there. Now, the key here is many of you are thinking, well, we've already implemented revenue recognition. The timing of when you adopted 606 does not impact the applicability of this, right? So whether you previously adopted it or whether you took the deferral does not change the outcome here. So they set up the effective date accordingly. So if an entity has not yet adopted Topic 606, then you're going to apply the transition guidance as well as the effective date for Topic 606. If you have adopted 606, now you're going to do this for interim and annual periods beginning after December 15, 2020. You can early adopt, and it would be treated retrospectively to the date of Topic 606. So Topic 606 gives a couple of different options. If you don't do it with 606, you have to do it retrospective to 606. All right. Well, hopefully that was a good summary of some of the changes for franchisors and revenue recognition. Hopefully that will help those who are in the process of adopting 606 who took that delay. Thank you guys so much for joining me, and I hope to see you on a future Nano Learning. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.